Official science says that the first humans arrived in America about 13,000 years ago. They came across the Bering Bridge when the ice receded. And this theory, known as Clovis-first, has been an indisputable truth for decades. But what if this truth is not the whole truth? What if the first humans arrived in America much earlier than we think? New archaeological discoveries in Mexico and Chile are forcing scientists to rewrite history textbooks. These discoveries, ancient stone tools, mammoth bones, human footprints, indicate that humans were in America as early as 30,000 years ago. This evidence breaks with the official picture of migration and calls into question everything we knew about the settlement of the New World. Watch the video to the end to find out why these discoveries are causing controversy among archaeologists and whether they could completely rewrite the history of human migration. For a long time, the Clovis-first theory was the only model for the settlement of America. It claimed that the first humans, known as the Clovis culture, came to America via the Bering Land Bridge between Asia and Alaska about 13,000 years ago. This theory was based on the discovery of unique spearheads found throughout North America. These spearheads, known as Clovis points, were considered the first evidence of human presence. But over the years, new discoveries began to emerge that did not fit into this neat picture. Radiocarbon analysis of some of them showed that they were much older than 13,000 years, which called the entire model into question. One of the first and most controversial discoveries was the Monte Verde archaeological site in Chile. Archaeologist Tom Dillahay found traces of an ancient settlement here that was about 14,500 years old. This was 1,500 years earlier than the Clovis theory suggested. Dillahay found stone tools, fragments of mastodon bones, and even traces of wooden structures. For a long time, his discovery was questioned, but it was later confirmed by independent research. Monteverde became the first crack in the monolith of the Clovis theory. This discovery served as a catalyst for new research, which led to even more surprising results. Evidence of earlier human presence began to be found across the continent, in the caves of Oregon, on the coast of California, and even in Texas. These findings indicated that humans were in America long before the Clovis culture. What if official science simply ignores inconvenient facts because they don't fit into the accepted theory? What else do you think archaeologists are hiding from us? Share your guesses in the comments. In 2020, a real sensation rocked the scientific world. A group of archaeologists from Mexico, working in the Chiquit Cave high in the mountains, discovered about 1,900 stone artifacts. Radiocarbon analysis showed that they were between 25,000 and 30,000 years old. These artifacts, stone scrapers, knives, and arrowheads, were not similar to Clovis artifacts, suggesting the existence of another, earlier culture. This discovery was the first direct evidence that humans had been in America much earlier than previously thought. It completely destroyed the Clovis-first theory and opened the door to new hypotheses. For a long time, it was believed that between 25,000 and 30,000 years ago, all of North America was covered by a thick layer of ice, making it impossible to travel overland. However, the findings in the Chiquit Cave show that humans somehow managed to overcome this barrier and populate the continent. Archaeologists led by Cyprian Ardelin carefully studied each layer of the cave. They found that the artifacts were distributed across different layers, indicating that the cave had been used by ancient people over a long period of time. This discovery has sparked huge controversy in the scientific community. Some scientists question the dating methods and argue that the artifacts could have been shifted into older layers due to natural processes such as landslides or animal movement. However, the authors of the study are confident in their data and believe that they are dealing with a revolutionary discovery that completely changes our understanding of the settlement of America. How could people have reached America 30,000 years ago if the Bering Strait was closed by ice? We'll tell you about it in a minute. In 2021, an even more amazing discovery was made in White Sands National Park in New Mexico. A group of scientists found human footprints imprinted in the dry bed of an ancient lake. Radiocarbon analysis showed that they were between 21,000 and 23,000 years old. These footprints belonged to children and teenagers and were found next to the footprints of mammoths, camels, and giant sloths. This discovery is unique in that these are not just artifacts, but direct evidence of human presence. These footprints could not have been faked or blown away by the wind. They were sealed in layers of earth for thousands of years. Scientists from the U.S. Geological Survey and the University of Arizona used optically stimulated luminescence to accurately date the footprints. This method allows us to determine when the sand in which the footprints were left was last exposed to sunlight. The results were unequivocal. The footprints are indeed very ancient and date back to the height of the last ice age, when glaciers covered most of North America. This discovery, published in the journal Science, caused a real revolution in archaeology. Not only did it confirm the existence of the pre-Clovis culture, but it also gave us a unique opportunity to glimpse the daily lives of these ancient people. We can see how they moved, how they hunted, and how they interacted with their environment. For example, one of the footprints shows a person carrying a child, which suggests a complex social organization. All of these findings, Monteverde in Chile, Chiquituite in Mexico, and finally the footprints in New Mexico, paint a completely new picture of the settlement of the Americas. Instead of a single wave of migration that came across the Bering Bridge, we see a series of earlier and possibly different migrations that occurred long before the Clovis culture. The discoveries in the Chiquite Cave and at the bottom of a dried-up lake in the White Sands completely destroy the traditional theory that the first humans arrived in America via the Bering Strait at the end of the last ice age. At that time, 30,000 years ago, huge ice sheets, such as the Laurentian and Cordilleran, joined together to form an insurmountable barrier that blocked all land routes. This means that people could not travel from Siberia to America by land. This forced scientists to put forward new, bolder hypotheses. One of the most popular was the coastal hypothesis. According to this hypothesis, people could have reached America by sea, traveling in primitive boats along the Pacific coast. This route was free of ice. Along the coast were islands and patches of land that could serve as temporary stops and provide resources. Another, even more unusual hypothesis, known as the Solitrean hypothesis, suggests that the first humans arrived in America from Europe along the edge of the ice in the Atlantic Ocean. This theory is based on the similarity of stone tools found in Eastern America to those of the Solitrean culture in Europe. However, most scientists are skeptical of this hypothesis, as it requires an incredibly complex sea voyage that would have been impossible at the time. Regardless of which of these routes was chosen, one thing is clear: the history of the settlement of America is much more complex than we thought. It was not a single migration, but rather a series of several, possibly independent waves that took different paths and occurred at different times. If people couldn't get to America via the Bering Bridge 15,000 years ago, how did they do it? Was there another route? Let's discuss it further. One of the new hypotheses suggests that people could have reached America by following a coastal route, traveling along the Pacific coast in boats. This hypothesis, called the Kelp Highway, is based on the idea that there was a continuous ecosystem with a high level of biological diversity along the Pacific coast, from Northeast Asia to South America. These were forests of seaweed, kelp, that were home to fish, marine mammals, and birds. This sea route could have provided ancient migrants with everything they needed to survive: food and materials. Unlike the land route, which was blocked by glaciers, this route was free of ice and allowed people to move south, gradually populating the coast. This theory explains why the most ancient traces of human presence in America were found so far south, for example, in Chile, Monteverde, dating back 14,500 years. If people had traveled overland, they would have settled North America first, and the oldest artifacts would have been found there. However, the findings in South America suggest that people may have come by sea, moving along the coast. To confirm this hypothesis, scientists are looking for traces of ancient settlements that are now underwater, as sea levels were much lower at the end of the last ice age. They also use genetic research to trace the migration routes of ancient peoples. This research shows that Native Americans have genetic links to peoples of Northeast Asia, which is consistent with both theories but does not explain why the traces in America are so ancient. Findings at Monteverde also suggest that the ancient people who lived there hunted mastodons and other animals, and actively gathered plants such as wild potatoes, nuts, berries, and mushrooms. This suggests a complex culture that was much more advanced than previously thought. These facts, along with traces of wooden structures, indicate a sedentary lifestyle, which would have been impossible without sufficient resources. The main reason for the fierce debate is that these findings directly contradict what genetic research tells us about the settlement of America. Genetic analysis of Native Americans shows that they had a common ancestor who arrived in America via the Bering Strait about 15,000 years ago. Genetic data also points to a single wave of migration, not multiple waves. This creates a large gap between genetic and archaeological evidence. If humans were indeed in the Americas 25,000 to 30,000 years ago, where are the genetic traces of their descendants? So far, scientists have been unable to find these traces. This could mean two things. First, these ancient migrants died out without leaving any descendants. Second, they were so few in number that their genes were simply lost in the gene pool of later migrants. Either way, the discrepancy between genetics and archaeology creates a huge problem that scientists have yet to solve. In addition, many archaeologists doubt the accuracy of the dating. For example, artifacts from the Chile cave could have been moved to more ancient layers due to natural processes such as landslides, as we have already discussed. And although the authors of the study claim that this is unlikely, skeptics still question their conclusions. The same applies to the footprints in New Mexico. Despite the use of advanced dating methods, some scientists believe that the footprints could have been left much later. It would seem that such discoveries should be welcomed with enthusiasm by the scientific community, but they are causing fierce debate. Why? As always, genetics is to blame. More on that later. Genetic research confirms that the indigenous peoples of America have genetic links to the peoples of Asia. The traditional theory of the settlement of America, known as Clovis-first, was based on archaeological findings. However, with the advent of paleogenetics, the science that studies the DNA of ancient organisms, scientists have gained a new, powerful tool for reconstructing the past. Analysis of mitochondrial DNA and the Y chromosome in Native Americans showed that they share genetic markers with the peoples of North Asia. This confirmed that their ancestors came from that continent. However, as we have already mentioned, genetic data indicates that this happened 15,000 years ago, which creates a large gap with new archaeological findings that suggest a much earlier settlement. Some scientists suggest that earlier waves of migration were so small that their genetic trace was simply lost in the gene pool of the more numerous descendants of the Clovis culture. This hypothesis, known as the displacement hypothesis, suggests that later migrants, being more adaptable or technologically advanced, displaced or assimilated earlier populations, leaving no genetic traces behind. Another hypothesis, on the contrary, argues that the most ancient migrants did not disappear, but simply mixed with later ones, and their genes are still present in the genomes of modern peoples. But so far, we cannot identify them due to the limitations of our methods. This in turn opens the door to new research that may find these ghost genetic markers and finally fill in the gaps in the history of the settlement of America. A recent study published in the journal Cell in 2018 showed that the genomes of ancient Native Americans found in North and South America can be divided into two branches. One is closely related to the populations of Canada and Greenland, and the other to the populations of Central and South America. This suggests that there were at least two waves of migration to America, which contradicts the classical theory. Moreover, genetic analysis of ancient bones found in Siberia has shown that they have a genetic link to some of the indigenous peoples of America, suggesting that the Bering Bridge was used for migration. However, this does not explain how people got to America 20,000, 30,000 years ago when the Bering Strait was closed. Thus, we see that genetics, like archaeology, does not give us a complete answer, but only raises more questions. Perhaps we still need to find new evidence that can finally unite these two fields of science. Skulls have been found in South America that are unlike those of North American Indians. One of the most mysterious finds, which does not fit into the generally accepted theory, is the Lucia skull, discovered in Brazil in 1975. Its age is estimated to be approximately 11,500 years old. Lucia is, in fact, the first American woman. But the most surprising thing about her is her anatomy. The Lucia skull has a narrow and elongated face and prominent brow ridges, making it similar to the skulls of ancient Australians or Aborigines from Australia and Melanesia, rather than the skulls of modern Native Americans. This discovery caused a huge controversy in the scientific community. Some scientists, including the discoverer himself, Walter Neves, suggested that Lucia and other similar skeletons found in South America belonged to an earlier wave of migrants who came to the continent long before the ancestors of the Indians and may have had a different origin. This could be the first evidence of two different waves of migration. However, not all scientists agree with this hypothesis. Some researchers argue that phenotypic differences may be the result of adaptation to local conditions and do not necessarily indicate different origins. Others suggest that Lucia may have been a member of a very small, isolated population that did not leave a significant genetic trace. Either way, the mystery of Lucia remains one of the most intriguing in the history of the settlement of America. Differences in stone tools and technologies also suggest that there were several waves of migration to America. The most striking example of cultural divergence is the difference between Clovis points and artifacts from more ancient sites, such as Monte Verde and Chiquite Cave. Clovis points are long, thin, double-edged spearheads that were perfectly suited for hunting large game such as mammoths. They can be found throughout North America, indicating the existence of a single widespread culture. At the same time, the artifacts from Chiquite Cave are completely different. They are simple stone scrapers, knives, and points that are unlike Clovis points. This suggests that the people who made them belong to a different, more ancient culture that used different technologies. The same can be said about the artifacts from Monte Verde. Although arrowheads were found there, they were much more primitive than Clovis ones. These differences in technology and culture can be explained in two ways. The first is cultural evolution, where one culture develops over time and changes its technology. But this is unlikely, as the age difference between these cultures is too great. A more likely scenario is that there were several waves of migration, each bringing its own unique culture and technology. This confirms the theory that the settlement of America was a much more complex process than we thought. It was not a single mass migration across the Bering Bridge. It was a series of several, possibly independent waves, each with its own path, its own culture, and its own destiny. Some of these cultures may have died out without leaving any descendants, while others mixed with later arrivals, passing on their technologies and genes. Studying these differences is the key to unraveling the history of the settlement of America. New discoveries in paleogenetics confirm that human history is not a single straight line. Research on the genetic material of Denisovans, Neanderthals, and Homo sapiens has shown that we have interacted and exchanged genes for tens of thousands of years. Scientists from the University of Adelaide and the Max Planck Institute analyzed the genomes of more than 1,600 people from different parts of the world and confirmed that our DNA contains traces of 4 episodes of interbreeding with archaic species. One of these episodes involves a ghost species that is thought to have diverged from our lineage about 1 million years ago. This discovery, published in the journal Nature Communications, proves that our genealogy is much more complex than previously thought. In addition, a 2020 study published in the journal Current Biology showed that the genomes of modern West African peoples also contain traces of an unknown archaic hominid. This African ghost population, which split from our lineage about 500,000 years ago, was neither Neanderthal nor Denisovan. This discovery suggests that interactions between different hominid species occurred not only in Eurasia, but also in Africa. These facts, confirmed by rigorous scientific research, completely change our understanding of human evolution. Instead of presenting it as a single migration from Africa, we now understand that it was a constant interaction and interbreeding with other species. These discoveries show that our uniqueness as a species is not the result of a simple victory over others, but rather the result of adaptive mixing that allowed us to inherit the best traits from other species. What if our history is not a single straight line, but a complex maze of migrations and contacts? How do you see the future of archaeology if it turns out that we still do not know the whole truth about the settlement of America? Today we are at a crossroads where genetics, archaeology, and geology come together to write a new, more accurate history. We still have many questions to answer. What happened to these early migrants? Why have their genetic traces not been preserved? And how many more lost chapters are there in our history? While we search for answers, Please share in the comments what topics you would like to see in future videos on our channel. And of course, don't forget to subscribe so you don't miss our next investigations.